Truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, November 7th, 2024, the 1387th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at I'mYourModerator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the free version on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site in the show notes or by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so yesterday, because it was the day after the fake election, I made the subscriber stream public on Rumble. You can see it on Rumble. You can see it on YouTube. Just go to I'm Your Moderator on either platform, and you'll get that. If you are on Substack, if you are a paid subscriber, you can listen to the audio version or watch the video there. But in that episode, I go through at some considerable length what I think it means that the television has announced that Donald Trump won a fake election. And that is what happened. The regime has conferred some abstract power to Donald Trump with the rank of president-elect. They are immediately going to set to removing the power of that rank, diminishing the abstract power that that title confirms, that rank confirms, the same way they did in 2016 during that transition period into 2017. And then they immediately proceeded to begin removing the power, the abstract power, from the title and rank of president. And of course, they did all of it while telling us that we were threatening democracy and threatening institutions. Shifting that abstract power temporarily to Donald Trump is only real in the false reality layer. In reality prime, what matters is whether or not the person with the rank of president actually has the people behind him, because it's the people, that public mandate, that makes the rank of president legitimate. Beyond that, it is whether or not the actual kinetic power represented by the military is really under the command of the person with the title and rank of president. Donald Trump, by reality prime standards, is the real and legitimate holder of that rank. But that was true before Tuesday, and we've been talking about this generally for months, so I don't want to rehash the whole thing. But there is nothing about understanding that our election system remains irredeemably broken and that the election was fake that takes away from Donald Trump and his accomplishment. It is hard and diligent work that gave Donald Trump that public mandate. It is the people's openness and understanding and trust that led the people to confer that power to him in the first place. Joe Biden has ostensibly held that abstract power, title, and rank for the last 4 years. Today is actually the 4-year anniversary of the TV announcing that Joe Biden was the real president-elect. But Joe Biden hasn't seemed to wield virtually any power at all, and certainly not the sort of power that Donald Trump wielded or that most presidents have wielded. The reason for that is that Joe Biden only had the abstract power of his title and rank, which quickly diminished and then completely diminished over time as people realized that something was missing from that abstract title and rank. Joe Biden had no public mandate, and I can't think of a single example that would lend any proof to the suggestion that Joe Biden was actually the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. Donald Trump does not need the approval of the abstract power hierarchy, and he doesn't need to operate within that superficial layer of our government that has been constructed on top of the constitutional republic. The participants in that abstract power hierarchy have to agree to the rules of the abstract power hierarchy. So they will treat Joe Biden as president and claim he is legitimate despite him not having the presidential powers in reality prime. He doesn't have the public mandate, doesn't seem to control the military. Admitting that our elections are still fake and incapable of producing legitimate representatives takes nothing away from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is more than big enough to handle people questioning the election system that just caused the TV to declare that he is the winner and he will be our next president. Do you think Donald Trump wants this election system to remain in place? He's said constantly for 4 years that the system is broken and it's designed to cheat. We have talked for at least a year about this exact situation and how it's not possible that Donald Trump being declared the winner by the television could possibly make the elections real. They're still fake. They're still rigged. We can watch that rig continuing on right now in Arizona, in Nevada. We're going to see it in these House races. Kari Lake looks like she's about to be the nationwide mascot for having elections stolen once again, just as we suggested a few weeks ago. We're going to watch the situation play out over the next couple of weeks And rather than the country all ignoring it and just watching Katie Hobbs and Stephen Richer and the rest of them lie and deny on MSNBC, people's attention can now be on that outcome in Arizona. And that's going to expose the system right as people are doubting it. And it's important to remember that none of this is happening by mistake. It is our job to continue telling the truth while Trump and his team just continue to operate. We're not here to be their cheerleaders. We're here to do the work of learning and understanding and communicating so that the people around us who don't pay all that much attention, who aren't that engaged or attached to what's happening, who are going to have a lot of questions in the future, actually have people they can turn to try to make at least some sense of things. And what happens otherwise? Do we just watch the plan play out for another 2 years, another 4 years, another 8 years? What happens after Donald Trump? We just give that role to whoever the conservative establishment decides is the right guy? It's got to be better than that. The people are supposed to be engaged. We're supposed to reveal the truth and share the truth. And the truth is that our election system is just as rigged as it was on November 4th of 2020. We can't just ignore that because we want to have emotions of celebration for how long? A few days? I don't have any interest in giving these communists a few days of a head start. Give them time to convince the country that all our elections are just fine before they announce as winners people who benefited from rigged elections. We are watching now as everyone in the Con Inc. info op celebrates the results and tries to move everyone along from the elections. Oh, don't look at those elections. Thank goodness the system held strong this time. We were able to defeat the Democrats' rigging. Let's just keep going. Well, the vast majority of them ignored election fraud in 2020 and sat idly by calling Joe Biden president after our country had been usurped. And then they supported people other than Donald Trump to win a fake Republican primary so that they could get rid of Trump and never talk about election fraud ever again. Of course they don't want to talk about election fraud right now. We were all told we're not allowed to talk about it before the election because that's going to discourage people from coming out. Now, after the election, now that Trump has won, we're not allowed to talk about it because we don't want to diminish Trump's win. And oh yeah, everybody needs to experience their emotions, at least for a little while these communists rig these other elections. And of course, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. I've been talking about this on this podcast for a year. I remember people getting mad at me at one of our Badlands conferences back in January. But here we are. The system is obviously broken, despite it telling us that Donald Trump won. What else was it going to tell us? It was already narratively too big to rig. The goal is always to preserve the system, and that is what they are doing. And they are getting help from MAGA and truthers who are sincerely arguing that now that we've won, the system can remain in place. And I'll come back to some of this in just a second. But last night we had another really, really interesting post on X, formerly Twitter, from one Mike Pompeo. Now, a few weeks ago, I did an episode called No Transition, based on an article about how Donald Trump and his team was not involved, at least not to the expected extent, with the Government Services Agency and the illegitimate Biden administration to arrange the next presidential transition in the event that Donald Trump was declared by the television as the winner. And over a series of episodes, we talked about parallel governments and how they exist in countries. When the regime is in control of the government, then everybody in that government is legitimate. When they're not in control of that government, the regime continues to work with its own shadow government, its own parallel government. And we talked about the report on Venezuela from 2020 by the International Crisis Group, a very high-level globalist think tank with banks and energy companies as its corporate partners, Lord Malik Brown as its chairman, people like George and Alexander Soros on its board of trustees, as well as people from the State Department, the military-industrial complex, the intelligence community. And the report talked about two presidents in Venezuela. There was the actual president, Nicolas Maduro, who's still there. And then there was the fake president, Juan Guaido, who was recognized as president by regime-oriented countries. It's just a matter of who the regime is doing business with. The people who make it their business to choose the leaders of nations around the world and overthrow governments do this sort of thing all the time. We as Americans are convinced that it never happens here, so no one in the country really bothers trying to understand it. But we've just witnessed it for 4 years, and we're going to witness it continue. But in that episode, I played this clip of Mike Pompeo at a press conference on November 10th, 2020.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, successful today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, a minute afternoon, will also be successful. I went through a transition on the front, and I've been on the other side of this. I'm very confident that we will do all the things that are necessary to make sure that the government, the United States government, will continue to perform its national security function as we go forward.
A smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Perhaps now we're having a smooth transition to a third Trump administration. I guess we'll just have to see. But Mike Pompeo yesterday on X, formerly Twitter, pulled up a tweet with that video from 2020 from C-SPAN, and he quote tweeted that post and adding the phrase, "as I was saying," the same phrase that Donald Trump used at the beginning of his speech in his return to Butler, Pennsylvania. Now, we have heard many times over the years that Pompeo is a villain, most often from Tucker Carlson. Take that as you will. But Pompeo also said this last December on Fox News with Maria Bartiromo.
You've had an incredible, distinguished career from Kansas congressman to director of the CIA to the Secretary of State for this great nation. Let me ask you, if President Trump is the nominee and then wins the White House, are you planning to be in his cabinet?
Maria, if I'm asked to serve and I think I can make a difference, I've always said yes.
I would suggest that there is substantial reason to think that Pompeo was well aware of these plans back when he said that in November of 2020. And related, Just the News had an article yesterday with the headline, "Now that Trump has won, here's who may come to the White House with him." Now, Just the News is John Solomon's website. John Solomon is a journalist who has had consistently good access to the Trump administration and was the country's superstar reporter on virtually everything Russia hoax related. So he has some pretty good perspective on the overall Trump project in general. Here are some of the people suggested in this article as potential Trump administration members in this next term. The writer Ben Whedon lists Steve Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary, Mike Pompeo, of course, General Keith Kellogg as a potential NSA, Christopher Miller for Secretary of Defense, Robert Lighthizer, dealing with trade and economic issues, same for Peter Navarro. And then he lists, of course, Elon Musk, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't know what they would do, but I guess we're just going to have all of the television characters in the administration. It'll be just like The Apprentice. We were actually just watching a really long reality television show for who gets to be our next God King in 2028. But the point is, there's at least some structure to all of this. You can wonder if it's good or bad, but the idea that we are going to set this whole project off course by being too honest about our elections is crazy. We're not going to hurt Donald Trump. We're not going to hurt his feelings. We're not going to make his power somehow disappear. We're not going to give the communists a win. It's not optional whether or not We expose the corrupt system. That's the point. We are not just supposed to be cheerleaders who then take advantage of power once we have a little bit of it again. We've talked a number of times over the last year or so about Donald Trump saying that he doesn't actually need the votes. He needs to protect the vote. And that certainly wouldn't require a real 2024 election. We haven't even protected the vote from 2020 yet. And people are apparently getting ready to move on. But I didn't realize that Rachel Maddow had covered these various Trump statements. Here she is, and we will talk about her after. But just listen to Trump's words and consider the fact that he has said this multiple times.
But let me also point out something more strange, which has been happening at the same time and it hasn't had as much attention. The day before Trump made those remarks on Friday, he said, you're never going to have to vote again after you vote for me this one time. The day before that, on Thursday last week, he didn't say that people wouldn't have to vote anymore once he was elected this November. Now, the day before that, on Thursday, he told his supporters, not that they're not going to have to vote again, but that they don't have to vote this time, that they don't need to vote for him this November.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes. He said that on Thursday last week. And it turns out this is something, when you look, he says this all the time now. Watch.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
We don't need votes. I tell my people, I don't need any votes. We got all the votes we need. I don't need votes. We don't need votes. We got more votes than anybody's ever had. You don't have to vote. Don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes.
Don't worry about voting. Of all the weirdness around this campaign, this is a truly strange thing to tell people, right? Don't vote. I don't need your vote. I don't want your vote. I mean, all the surface level weirdness is, worth noting. Having a new position on literally anything you can think of as soon as any random rich guy tells you to, that's a weird thing. Picking the eccentric billionaire's intern for your running mate, even though you apparently had no idea who he was or what a disaster he is on television, all of this is weird. But telling voters, do not bother to vote for me, it doesn't matter if you do, I don't need your votes. That is a thing that should prick up your ears. Because what that means is that he doesn't think he needs to win the vote to win the election. He doesn't think he needs to win the election in order to take power. He thinks something other than votes is going to determine whether or not he gets back in the White House.
Now, that is quite an astute observation from Rachel Maddow. I would not expect that. Of course, Donald Trump knows that he doesn't need the votes. Donald Trump knows it's a fake election. Donald Trump knows all the elections are fake. And it's not like Rachel Maddow has a problem with that. She doesn't believe that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. She just knows that her audience will. She's told them for the last 9.5 years that Donald Trump is a criminal. He's a tax cheat. He's a Russian agent. He's a racist. He's a rapist. He's tried to overthrow the country. He committed insurrection. He's guilty of espionage. He's guilty of fraud. She cheered the Department of Justice on as they attempted to prosecute Donald Trump and imprison him to whatever degree was required to remove the public's mandate. And of course, they knew that they couldn't actually get to him, so they just used the elements of the government they had under their control, media influence, financial influence, to destroy Donald Trump's abstract power within that abstract power hierarchy. Make it so that even Donald Trump's supporters are too embarrassed or too afraid to say that they support Donald Trump publicly in order to make it something that everyone agrees to. Everyone knows that it's not okay to support Donald Trump. That is what they want. That is what they need, because then they can do anything, knowing that there's no one to stand up against them and that no one really cares. And they've used that process to destroy people for centuries or maybe millennia. It just doesn't work on Donald Trump. And one of the main reasons it doesn't work is because the people know what people like Rachel Maddow are doing. And by the way, Rachel Maddow is just acting offended at what Donald Trump said, or like it really means he's going to try to overthrow the country. Remember this?
Folks, we got a lot of work to do. I don't only need you to get me elected, I need you once I'm elected.
Well, that sure is strange, isn't it? Elections aren't just a little bit rigged and manipulated. They're not just stolen sometimes. They are selections. The Uniparty selects the candidates in the primary, and they select the winners in the general, prioritizing keeping the system in place, which is why before elections and immediately after elections, everything is all about accepting the results of the election, even if they don't accept them. They will say they accept them, and then they will challenge them in court, and they will object to the electors in the joint session of Congress on January 6th, not because they actually want to challenge the elections and provide transparency and see what's what, but because they want to diminish and delegitimize people like Donald Trump so that the rest of their efforts, lawfare, subversion by the administrative state, can work and go unpunished by the people because the people will think it's justified. Some of my Hollywood friends have been in touch with me over the last few days, telling me about what the social media atmosphere is like among those sorts of people. There's a coordinated effort right now by many of those celebrities, and I strongly suspect these are paid sponsorships and advertisements. But the effort is to convince everybody to come together. We just need to be friends with each other. Everything before Tuesday, that was a time for division. But now that the election is over, it's a time for healing. They're the good people because they're calling for unity. And so it doesn't matter the amount of division they've caused every single day for the last 9 years. It only matters that right now, while people recognize that they are the divisive ones, that they do represent a tiny, shrinking minority, they're here to let you know that they are still the good ones. It is so spectacularly narcissistic. It's also quite amusing. I saw a really pathetic one where a guy was advertising a phone that doesn't have any apps on it, and it doesn't have all the fancy graphics. It's not a smartphone. It's just a very basic phone. You can use it to make phone calls and send text messages, and it's got a maps feature, but that's it. Going to strip down a little bit, go off grid, take that minimalist approach. Sure, you've been a paid propagandist for years, but now, after the election's over, you just get offline and you disappear. And if someone says, "Hey, commie, you've ruined everything. Do you see what's happening in the world?" You say, "Nah, man, you see, I didn't actually ruin everything. I haven't even been paying attention for the last 2 months while the country's fallen to shit." It's all very heroic. It's actually some of the most dystopian shit I've seen throughout this entire time. Hello, commie. Did your hate movement fail for a little while? Are you realizing that everyone sees you for what you are? Why not get away for a while? Just disappear for a while. They won't blame you. They'll forget about you. And then you can just come right back later. We'll save your spot in the hate movement. Just buy this phone. It is amazing. A product advertisement masking some of the most narcissistic virtue signaling I've ever seen to cover up all the political advertisements. These are actual paid propagandists serving the actual bloodline and ideological descendants of the worst regimes of the 20th century. But here in America, we don't call them Nazi propagandists. We call them Emmy Award-winning actors. And we'll come back to that in a second. I mentioned this on the live stream yesterday. Liz Cheney, in response to the television announcing that Donald Trump had won the fake election, posted on X, formerly Twitter, "Our nation's democratic system functioned last night, and we have a new president-elect. All Americans are bound, whether we like the outcome or not, to accept the results of our elections. No, we're not bound in any way to do that. Not in any way whatsoever. Not legally, not morally. not constitutionally, not patriotically. We are not bound in any way or any sense to accept the results of these elections. That is not a requirement. That is the sort of thing that authoritarians and totalitarians will say. That is the sort of thing you might say if you had a system that rigged elections and you didn't want anyone to recognize it or ever discuss it. And of course, that provides cover for all the people who have denied that our elections are rigged for the last 4 years. They don't want to ever discuss this again because it's going to make them look like traitors. They just accepted the usurpation. They bowed and groveled and called Joe Biden the president so that we could preserve our corrupt institutions. Just groveling statists bowing to the global regime. That's our quote-unquote conservative establishment. Kamabla gave a concession speech yesterday. We listened to that live during the stream. She spoke for about 12 minutes. It was trite, it was pointless, and it was moronic. But despite that, there were also some very interesting messages hidden in that speech. Now, it's been pointed out that Hillary Clinton gave roughly the same speech in 2016 as she was conceding the day after she lost to Trump. But it all has a very Obama-esque tone. Like the actors disseminating the same message, Kamabla presented herself as the unifier. She's not the problem. In fact, she is the solution to the problem, but the people, they're just not ready for that solution yet. So they're going to have to try to implement their solution without the people's permission. But above any of that, you have to accept the results of the election.
Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it. At the same time, in our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
You see that? It's very, very important to accept the results of this election. It's one of the foundational principles of our democracy. And of course, no, it's not. This is not our democracy, quote unquote. This is a constitutional republic, or at least it was until that constitution was inverted and replaced by the system we have now that gradually just eliminates all of the founding principles. There is nothing about the Constitution that requires the people to accept what their government does. We do not need to accept the results of an election that is not provably free and fair, and where the results are not transparent and verifiable by everyone. Anything less than that is tyranny. And you really do have to wonder why they're pushing it so hard. Who are they encouraging to accept the results of this election? Is it their own supporters who, in a matter of days or perhaps weeks, will be encouraged in whatever manner necessary to do everything they can to override the results of that election? And hey, all good. please, by all means, encourage them. Let's get the whole system open so everyone can see what's inside. I'm not scared of that. And Donald Trump isn't scared of that. The people telling us to accept the results of the election are the ones who are scared of having the results of the election examined. That's why they didn't let us check in 2020. They know what's there. So once again, they are trying to exploit us. And it's Kamala Harris, Liz Cheney, a neocon with a little R next to her name that is now just openly on the uniparty side. She's not hiding it anymore. And we have the Republican establishment, all of the election believers over the last 4 years. And I guess we have some portion of MAGA who just really wants a break and really wants to check out. And hey, guys, if that is what you want to do, it's okay that you do that. You don't need permission from anyone, and you don't need to make excuses for it. Just be like, you know what, guys, I'm just going to savor this win for a little while and take a break. My heart's not in it right now. That's it. You can say that. No one's going to judge you for that. You don't need to get the whole group to agree that you're doing the principled right thing. And that's where I draw the line. We actually have people arguing right now that we need to focus on celebrating this win, not questioning the election system that gave us this win. When are we going to do it? Later? We're going to lie for now, knowing that later on it'll be okay to tell the truth. Once people are ready for it, we'll just say, hey, bud, you know how we talk about how important the truth is all the time? Yeah? Well, here's the thing. I wanted to take a little break and pat myself on the back, so I lied to you for a while. But here I am to tell you the truth, and from this point forward, we'll just resume our truth mission where we both pretend we tell the truth all the time. It's a very strange thing to do while arguing that our collective emotions must be validated and we should preference that over telling the truth. While there are active election steals in progress that we should be exposing, and while there is a direct coordinated op to convince the country that actually elections are just fine, giving Donald Trump that win and then delegitimizing him and attempting to disqualify him while supporting the legitimacy of our election system that underlies the entire government nationwide at every level is a massive regime win that we are just handing them because we think that our win is just the greatest thing ever. Now, you can get upset. You can call me wrong, but I've been saying that exactly this thing would happen for a year and maybe longer. I imagine we probably got into a bunch of this throughout the Ron op. Now, I hate to make you listen to Kamala Harris again, but hopefully this will be the last 2 minutes that you ever have to hear her voice on my show. I suspect, unfortunately, that won't be true, but hopefully.
The fight for our freedom will take hard work. But like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work can be joyful work. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it. To the young people who are watching, it is... I love you. To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen when anyone tells you something is impossible because it has never been done before. You have the capacity to do extraordinary good in the world. And so to everyone who is watching, do not despair. This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. This is a time to organize, to mobilize, and to stay engaged for the sake of freedom and justice and the future that we all know we can build together. Look, many of you know I started out as a prosecutor, and throughout my career, I saw people at some of the worst times in their lives. People who had suffered great harm and great pain, and yet found within themselves the strength and the courage and the resolve to take the stand, to take a stand, to fight for justice, to fight for themselves, to fight for others. So let their courage be our inspiration. Let their determination be our charge. And I'll close with this. There's an adage an historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars.
Now, I am sorry about making you listen to all of that, especially the last part. I didn't initially plan on adding in that last part, but Kamala Harris decided to relay that old adage from an historian who happens to be Martin Luther King Jr. Strange she didn't just say that, but she did do MLK voice in delivering at least some of her speech, so that's basically the same thing. She hopes times don't get dark. She tells everybody, hey, don't worry. All that stuff that we said Donald Trump was going to do, that's not going to happen. The times aren't going to be as dark as we said they were going to be, but they might be. And if they are, well, we all have to be some bright and shining stars. We need to be a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. It almost sounds like George H.W. Bush's 1,000 points of light. But as far as Kamala Harris is concerned, I guess the way you become part of that brilliant, brilliant billion of stars is by fighting. In fact, she said fight something like 17 times or maybe more in that speech. We were told that saying fight and encouraging action and engagement was calling for insurrection. And I don't want to go overboard, but we're talking about a woman who posted on X, formerly Twitter, asking people to donate to a bail fund that would bail out rioters during the Summer of Love. Kamala Harris is a direct supporter of BLM Antifa and encouraged them in 2020 to stay out there on those streets. She talked about the courage of those people who would go out there and get involved and how we should allow their courage to be our inspiration. And of course, the celebrities who participated in the Pro-Kamala info op, very likely for significant sums of money, are encouraging their followers to be as narcissistic as them, but also make sure to protect each other. Like, for instance, all of those celebrities, Kamala Harris, other political communicators from the regime, tell their supporters that Donald Trump is going to kill them. He's going to take away all their rights. He's going to make it so they can't even exist. And because he represents such a threat, that means his supporters do as well. Because combined, that threat is so great that we need to stand up to that threat. We need to get out there in the streets and make our presence known and stand up to that threat. What we need is a resistance. So grab your pink pussy hat, grab your George Floyd fentanyl and counterfeit bills, and get out there on those streets. But protect each other out there. And just know that your courage out there is going to be our inspiration at home to keep yelling about this stuff on the internet. We're not going to get out there in those streets with you and try to protect you in that way, but we will communicate to the country that you guys are doing an awfully good job. Now, sorry, I gotta go. My agent is calling on my special dystopian phone, letting me know I've won another acting award for this public service announcement. I can't believe it, but our celebrities are encouraging a very violent insurrection. Oh, wait, I can believe it because they did that all throughout 2020. Now, if you think I'm making too much of this subtle messaging, okay, I guess we'll see what happens in the future. But it's not just the celebrities, and of course, it's not just Kamabla. Here is Mark Cuban.
Now, in the next few weeks, if not the next few days, they are going to start pushing to see how far the country is going to let them go without pushback, without protest. And part of this is because it's just psychologically advantageous for them to do this now, right? They're counting on the half the country that voted against them, the half the country that doesn't want to give up our system of government. They're counting on all those tens of millions of Americans to be despondent, to feel powerless, to check out, which of course would mean letting them do what they want, letting them run the table. What they really don't want is for the half the country that voted against them, the half the country that wants to keep our democracy. What they really don't want is for those tens of millions of Americans to wake up tomorrow feeling scrappy as hell, feeling, sure, regretful about the election outcome, but also, frankly, freed up from having to spend all of our time working on the election. So now we can work full time on being fricking pirates, on being a thorn in the side to anyone who now intends to try to turn this country into some tin pot tyranny. What they want least of all is to realize that half the country went to bed sad tonight, but then woke up tomorrow fired up with a new sense of purpose, knowing that apparently this is what we're on this earth to do as American citizens in this generation. Because history did not just end. Time did not just stop. We just got marching orders from the universe and the Electoral College that as of today, American citizens who do want to hold on to democracy, we know exactly what we're going to be spending the next days and weeks and likely years of our life working on.
Now, there's nothing particularly subtle about that messaging. And oh, yeah, by the way, that is Rachel Maddow, just kind of a different version of Mark Cuban, or more accurately, Mark Cuban is a different version of Rachel Maddow. That was actually the main one. I didn't realize that. But upon watching that segment again, I could tell that's actually just Rachel Maddow. But what you didn't see, because of course you're only listening, is in the middle of that clip, there's just a picture on the screen of the wrists and hands of a bunch of young communists wearing bright green wristbands and, of course, holding up the classic communism fist. She is calling for protest and acting like that protest is in response to something. Donald Trump and his minions are about to run roughshod over the half of the country that does not want to give up our form of government. But of course, that's not happening. Trump supporters just want to be able to go back to work and know that while they're there, their kids aren't being turned into transformers by the purple-haired member of Antifa employed as a second-grade teacher at the local government indoctrination center. We talked about the media a bit yesterday, specifically Elon Musk's comment on X, formerly Twitter, from election night when he said, "You are the media now." He followed that up with a longer post. The reality of this election was plain to see on X, while most legacy media lied relentlessly to the public. You are the media now. Please post your thoughts and observations on X. Correct others when wrong, and we will have at least one place in the world where you can come to find the truth. Now, I like the messaging. I like the motivation. And I am happy to give Elon the benefit of the doubt and believe that he really is working toward that as a goal. But Twitter is still a censored platform, and until that's no longer true, then it's not the most honest thing in the world to say this is where you can find the truth. The actual truth is that some forms of truth are barred from Twitter. But let's leave that aside for now. In response to this post, General Michael Flynn wrote, Elon Musk is selected for promotion to the highest order of service. He is now designated as Commander-in-Chief of all digital soldiers. This is a great honor, and we should all join in congratulating him for his selfless sacrifices to humanity and achieving total information dominance. May the Force be with you. I suspect General Flynn might mean Space Force. Elon Musk posted a picture of himself giving a salute to the American flag. It looks like it's probably created by AI, but that's okay. And he wrote, "It is morning in America again." But returning to his message, I think that is a very important message because he's actually describing all people have to do to manage our information environment. We just have to be active participants in warning our communities, our friends, our family, our neighbors, and however much of humanity we're able to reach on the internet about what's actually going on. If you're aware of terrible things in your town, call them out. And I'm not suggesting that we call out individuals. We're talking about government in its official capacity and the people in government in their official capacity. People who are ostensibly serving the people at large as their representative, they have a fiduciary duty to the people they're serving. And that hasn't been upheld in our society at all. The involvement of people in calling out corruption, in calling out the people who are implementing this global agenda, that's going to be critical. And people on X and other platforms as well, of course, can do all of that. And our information will be generated by the people. Now, it's not a perfect system. There is no perfect system for sharing truth because there's no authority on what constitutes truth. The government, the state, attempted to step in and do that. The authoritative source would hand down the information, and it would be transmitted to the people through the news, the official mouthpiece of the authoritative source. That is one centralized information stream that is made to look as though it represents all the information in the world when it doesn't. The decentralized form of that is everyone contributing, saying what they have learned, what they understand. And if people don't engage with it, that's fine. Obviously, if people don't want to get involved, that's fine as well. But he is describing a system where we can inform one another and pay attention to that, prioritize that rather than these official sources. Watching election coverage on network television, on these cable networks, is totally deranging. And that includes outlets like the Daily Weimar. Just the same story within the same central narrative for the same purpose, marketed to different people. It's just a different brand of MSNBC. It communicates information from the authoritative source. Whereas to be engaged in these online communities, getting information directly from the people involved and then sharing and analyzing that information represents an entirely different way of learning and then sharing what we've learned so that people can be better informed. Those are the instructions, and they're not just instructions to influencers or digital soldiers or independent journalists. It's everybody's responsibility to do all those things. Not for attention, not for money, not because you should want it to be your full-time job, only because the perspective of everyone matters. We can't all see everything, so we need people telling us what they see. Post thoughts and observations, correct others when wrong, and we will have at least one place in the world where you can come to find the truth. Well, you can come there to find some of the truth, but beyond that, he's right. Erik Prince also had some interesting thoughts on the new media and information environment. He was responding to a message on X, formerly Twitter, saying, "If I were Trump, one of my day one actions would be to abolish the White House press corps, kick them out of the White House and Air Force One, stream daily press briefings live on X, and curate questions from the public at large." Prince wrote, "The White House press corps actively covered up Joe Biden's very real mental decline. They endangered the nation and delegitimized their profession. Abolish their access, or at minimum, make a 100% changeover of credentialing. Now, watching the White House press corps over the last few years has been an exercise in absurdity. Watching them pretend to cover a fake administration as if they are actually in search of the truth, while knowing, because Joe Biden and Karine Jean-Pierre and Jen Psaki made it so obvious, that all of the journalists were going to be asking pre-screened questions that had answers prepared in advance, which means at that point, it's just two people acting like they are something other than they are as they read their parts of the script to one another, and it is broadcast to us. We don't have to pretend that they were actually fulfilling the roles the television suggests they're playing. I also, by the way, heard a rumor somewhere, and again, rumor, take it with a grain of salt, just an idea I heard and said, that sounds kind of cool. Someone mentioned the possibility of the White House press room being filled with independent journalists or podcasters, people who just ask whatever question they want to the person behind the podium, whether it's a press secretary or the president, with the expectation that that person will answer because that person is actually accountable to the people, rather than the situation we've grown up with outside of President Trump, where everyone behind that podium is our better, and we should feel privileged to ask them questions without expecting any sort of direct answer. There are ways to actually preserve our society. It just doesn't lead to the sort of society that would be interested in implementing the global regime's agenda. Now let's switch gears. As I've said many times over the past few years, Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. Donald Trump never conceded. Joe Biden was not properly certified, nor was he properly inaugurated. He is an illegitimate president, has never been a real American president, not at any point. And of course, other world leaders know that. Leaders of sovereign nations, leaders who are not aligned with the global regime, understand that, like Juan Guaido in Venezuela, Joe Biden is a fake president, propped up by regime media and regime control over finance, and the fact, of course, that regime-aligned countries will do business with Joe Biden. But Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and all the rest of the world's sovereign leaders are not confused. They know how things work. They have intelligence agencies. They don't believe that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, and it would be ridiculous to pretend otherwise. Therefore, they probably also don't believe that we had a real election on Tuesday. Scenarios are playing out around the world that are scripted and are playing out along a timeline. That does not mean that no part of that story is ever kinetic and real in a physical, reality prime-based way. Sadly, that's true sometimes, though not properly reported or communicated to us. But considering the fact that they are not real and organic and spontaneously occurring events in the world, we should understand immediately that they are not how they are portrayed. If one country isn't actually trying to destroy another country, and they are, for instance, just sending missiles at one another in order to wipe out irrelevant or non-existent targets in order to save face, you can call that a war, but is it a war? And if it's not a war where one country is actually trying to destroy another country, well, then they can stop putting on the act anytime they want. And Donald Trump has told us for a long time, as soon as I get elected, these wars will just come to an end. He said he'll get them settled within 24 hours. In fact, maybe that's what he's been doing. He's been silent since his victory speech late Tuesday night, technically early Wednesday morning. 36 hours and not a peep from Trump. So maybe he's just getting all of these foreign conflicts worked out. The fake President Joe Biden apparently has called Donald Trump to congratulate him and invite him to the White House to talk things over. Of course, it's hard to know which White House he's talking about, since it doesn't seem and has never seemed like Joe Biden actually has keys to the real one. But they did, of course, build that fake one in the Eisenhower Executive Office building across the street. And then they built another fake White House down the street that they are calling a museum and writing articles about. So it's possible that Biden is working out of the museum. Maybe Trump is helping the fake president find a glide path out of these foreign conflicts. Or maybe foreign leaders around the world are simply announcing that the war is just over. Vladimir Putin had a public event today. He addressed Donald Trump's election victory. He said his behavior at the moment of an attempt on his life left an impression on me. He turned out to be a brave man. He manifested himself in the correct way, bravely, as a man. Putin said, "I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him on his election as president." Asked about what he expects from the next Trump administration, he said, "I don't know what will happen now. I have no idea. For him, this is still his last presidential term. What he will do is his matter." The LA Times closed their article on Putin's speech with this: "While Trump is known for his admiration of Putin, the Russian leader has repeatedly noted that during Trump's first term, there were, quote, so many restrictions and sanctions against Russia like no other president has ever introduced before him." So Putin is saying that Trump was hard on Russia. Trump says that Trump was hard on Russia. And the media says that Donald Trump is Putin's puppet. The Kremlin welcomes Donald Trump's focus on achieving peace in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the special military operation, better known as Putin's very brutal invasion. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, said if the new administration is going to look for peace, not for the continuation of the war, it will be better in comparison with the previous one. Foreign Policy magazine, one of the official mouthpieces of the global regime, wrote this article yesterday: "Even Trump can't afford to lose the Ukraine war." What? Trump can't afford to lose the Ukraine war? Trump is not in the Ukraine war. If there is a Ukraine war, and Ukraine losing would not be bad for Donald Trump, although the subheadline is "Victory for Putin would be a grave blow to U.S. power." From the article, the need for clarity on the ground in Ukraine is obvious. NATO sources and Western security officials almost universally agree that Ukraine is slowly losing the war and that this winter will be critical. Trump's victory in the United States has only heightened these concerns, not least because he has a history of making tepid statements about Ukraine and the war. So the war that Ukraine is losing and destined to lose and has always been losing might be lost by Donald Trump because he doesn't say nice things about it. Trump has previously said that Ukraine should have ceded territory to Russia ahead of the invasion, claiming that even, quote, the worst deal would have been better than what we have now, end quote. He also accused Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky of making, quote, little nasty aspersions toward your favorite president, me, end quote. The situation in much of Ukraine is already grave. Ooh, scary. Also from the article, no one knows whether Trump has actually paid any attention to what is happening in Ukraine or what he thinks about Putin in 2024. He has repeatedly called Putin a genius during the conflict. Recently, while standing next to Zelensky, he said, "We have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship with President Putin," before adding, "I think if we win the election, we're going to get the war resolved very quickly." It's not clear that Trump fully comprehends how grave the situation is in Ukraine, nor how serious the consequences would be for Washington and its allies. It's not even clear that he particularly cares or believes that those consequences really exist. Wow. And many of his far-right allies see Putin and his allies, such as Hungary's Viktor Orban, as a role model for the kind of patriarchal nationalist state they want. No, that would be a sovereign nationalist state. But if that's what you mean by patriarchy, I can see why you communists are always so concerned about tearing down the patriarchy. Trump's positions can also be shifting and uncertain. Perhaps he has access to some inner information that the rest of us lack. Well, yeah, Kami, he has access to tons of information you lack. He's the president of the United States, and you are, according to your profile in Foreign Policy magazine, a Emmy Award-winning journalist covering European diplomacy. For the life of me, I have no idea what he won an Emmy for. Those are television awards. He was also CNN's politics editor, so maybe he was involved in one of their very important documentaries or something. These people really are incredible, though. They think they are foreign policy experts because they have a column in Foreign Policy magazine, and because of that, they think they know more than Donald Trump, the president, about foreign policy. This guy is concerned that Donald Trump has no idea what's going on in Ukraine, and he believes that Donald Trump might even think, for some reason, that the terrible consequences don't even exist. He writes, but on the likelihood that Trump is merely spitballing, someone in his inner circle needs to grab him right now and hammer home the message. The United States needs Ukraine to win. And sure, okay, all right, Emmy Award-winning journalist. Here is the quote-unquote president of Ukraine, the comedic actor Volodymyr Zelensky. It would be more believable for Volodymyr Zelensky to have won Emmys. Congratulations to Donald Trump on his impressive election victory. I recall our great meeting with President Trump back in September when we discussed in detail the Ukraine-U.S. strategic partnership, the victory plan, and ways to put an end to Russian aggression against Ukraine. I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength approach in global affairs. This is exactly the principle that can practically bring just peace in Ukraine closer. I am hopeful that we will put it into action together. We look forward to an era of a strong United States of America under President Trump's decisive leadership. We rely on continued strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the United States. We are interested in developing mutually beneficial political and economic cooperation that will benefit both of our nations. Ukraine, as one of Europe's strongest military powers, is committed to ensuring long-term peace and security in Europe and the transatlantic community with the support of our allies. I am looking forward to personally congratulating President Trump and discussing ways to strengthen Ukraine's strategic partnership with the United States. So, Putin is on board with peace, Zelensky is on board with peace, and Donald Trump is on board with peace. Seems like it might even happen before Donald Trump becomes officially president again. How is it even possible? Donald Trump said he was going to do it. As soon as he was elected, it would just happen within 24 hours. He wouldn't even say how he would do it. They asked him plenty of times, and he never said. And now here we are, watching it happen, sort of. At least it sounds like it's going to happen. It could happen at any time. In fact, it could have happened already. We might have just missed it. Maybe Donald Trump is so good at foreign policy, he could just take a 36-hour break from Truth Social and the world heals itself. How did he know it was going to happen? But that's not all. Let's go to the AP this morning. Germany faces sudden turmoil after ruling coalition collapses. Germany's government coalition has collapsed in dramatic fashion after Chancellor Olaf Scholz fired Finance Minister Christian Lindner of the pro-business Free Democrats in a late-night move following a marathon of crisis meetings. The three remaining ministers of the Free Democrats resigned in response, leading to the downfall of the government coalition. Scholz is expected to lead the country with a minority government, but the opposition is calling for an immediate no-confidence vote. But early Thursday, Transport Minister Volker Wissing from the Free Democrats unexpectedly took back last night's resignation and told reporters that after talking to Scholz, he decided to stay on as minister and leave the party instead. Also from the article, the chancellor announced late Wednesday that he would reach out to the leader of the biggest opposition leader in parliament, Friedrich Merz, from the center-right Christian Democrats, to confer on possible ways of strengthening the economy and defense and passing important legislation through parliament. But Merz on Thursday vehemently rejected Scholz's plan to wait to hold a vote of confidence until January. The coalition no longer has a majority in the German Bundestag, and therefore we call on the chancellor to call a vote of confidence immediately or at the latest by the beginning of next week. We simply cannot afford to have a government without a majority in Germany for several months now, and then campaign for several more months, and then possibly conduct coalition negotiations for several weeks. So all of a sudden, Germany's pro-regime government under Olaf Scholz is collapsing. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, this is the Russian government speaking, so it's Russian propaganda. Oh, no. Maria Zakharova says, the collapse of the government coalition exposed the biggest problem with today's political system in the Federal Republic of Germany. It is a classic banana republic, as per the term coined in the United States by O. Henry in 1904. For the record, no other country started reshuffling its own government the day the U.S. election results were published. Germany is the only one that did. Well, what did you expect? Berlin failed to keep Russian gas, which was vital for its industry and economy, as well as households, missed the opportunity to maintain its earlier economic growth pace, and is meekly watching its industries and companies relocate to the United States, anything to keep Washington satisfied. To top off this masochistic behavior, Berlin has now stopped pretending that the German government has any autonomy, that it is anything but the American neoliberals' viceroy in the European Union. Now, that is a very strong statement. I would have to disagree with her slightly, though. There are other governments that seem to be breaking up. This is from Tuesday, Election Day, in the BBC. Protests erupt in Israel after Netanyahu fires defense minister. Protests have erupted after Netanyahu fired the country's defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Netanyahu said a crisis of trust between the two leaders led to his decision, adding that his trust in Gallant had eroded in recent months and Foreign Minister Israel Katz would step in to replace him. Gallant said his removal was due to disagreement on 3 issues, including his belief that it is possible to get the remaining hostages back from Gaza if Israel makes painful concessions, which it can bear, according to Gallant. Many protesters on the streets were calling for Netanyahu to resign and demanding the new defense minister prioritize a hostage deal. Netanyahu and Gallant have long had a divisive working relationship. During the past year, there have been reports of shouting matches between the two men over Israel's war strategy. The former defense minister has also been unhappy at plans to continue to allow Israel's ultra-Orthodox citizens to be exempt from serving in the military. Now, these immediate protests in response are always key signals. That is the sort of thing that the regime can set up, and not the sort of thing that is likely to be a spontaneous movement among the people because a defense minister was fired. Now, in all likelihood, this will actually end the Israel conflict much sooner. You might remember back just after the paragliding go-kart incident, Gallant was forced into this coalition war council, and Gallant seems to be anti-Bibi. But of course, the global regime is also anti-Bibi. They were trying to get rid of him in a color revolution well before the paragliding go-kart incident. They have tried to get rid of him with street protests and street action since that time, and now they are doing it again in response to Netanyahu removing Gallant. Now, Gallant had a very good working relationship with the illegitimate Biden administration, but no one even needs to keep up the pretense anymore of doing business with the illegitimate Biden administration. And a firing like this in the middle of Election Day before Trump wins should be massive signal about the imminent Trump victory and the fact that the regime's desires for that conflict will not be fulfilled. Newsweek published this article yesterday. Hamas calls for immediate end to war after Trump election win. Wow, look at these terrorists just calling for an end to the war as soon as the TV announces that Donald Trump has won. A senior Hamas official has called for an immediate end to Israel's war against the group in the Gaza Strip and a plan to achieve Palestinian statehood in remarks shared with Newsweek in the wake of former President Donald Trump's election victory. And as we've discussed a number of times on this show, most of the world, the BRICS nations, already consider Palestine a state. Our media doesn't tell us this. And of course, the negotiating terms are all about a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. But we're not allowed to know about that because then it wouldn't make the rest of their story make sense. The election of Trump as the 47th president of the USA is a private matter for the Americans, Hamas Political Bureau member and spokesperson Bassem Naim told Newsweek. But Palestinians look forward to an immediate cessation of the aggression against our people, especially in Gaza, and look for assistance in achieving their legitimate rights of freedom, independence, and the establishment of their independent, self-sovereign state with Jerusalem as its capital. Now, that is quite interesting. Also quite interesting that a terrorist organization has a political bureau and its own spokespeople. That makes them sound more like a governmental organization, like the Taliban, for instance. The blind support for the Zionist entity Israel and its fascist government at the expense of the future of our people and the security and stability of the region must stop immediately, he added. Newsweek notes that the Israeli premier was the first to congratulate Trump on what was described as history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America, Netanyahu said. He later spoke with Trump. The conversation was described by the Israeli side as warm and cordial, and the two agreed to work together for Israel's security and also discussed the Iranian threat. Palestinian National Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who leads the West Bank-based government that rivals the Gaza-based Hamas, also congratulated Trump on his election victory Wednesday. Abbas expressed, quote, his aspiration to work with President Trump for peace and security in the region and stressed, quote, the commitment of our people to seek freedom, self-determination, and statehood in accordance with international law. He said, we will remain steadfast in our commitment to peace, and we are confident that under your leadership, the United States will support the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. Honestly, it is incredible how much President-elect Trump is getting done in 24 hours after being declared by the television as the winner of a fake election. He's just stopping these conflicts left and right as though they had ended during his first term as president, and we are just now being shown what happened. Or alternatively, all of these are very real wars where the countries are trying to destroy one another, but seeing that the map of the United States on television has turned red, meaning Donald Trump is back, well, that means they have to wrap up their wars immediately. They were absolutely trying to destroy one another, but now they've stopped because they don't want to get on Trump's bad side. It's almost like it was all set up this way. TASS, the Russian news agency, again, this could be Russian propaganda. And Russian propaganda is very dangerous. Global regime propaganda, as the global regime is literally waging war against the people of the world, that's the good stuff. We're supposed to believe that. You see, you can't believe the Russian propaganda, but this is a pretty simple piece of reporting. They're just telling us what the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has said. The headline, if Trump stops wars, he will deserve Nobel Peace Prize, says Lukashenko. From the article, he recalled that Trump during the election campaign promised, among other things, to settle the conflict in Ukraine. If he does, we will nominate him for the Nobel Prize. the Belta news agency quotes Lukashenko as saying. At the same time, according to Lukashenko, not everything will depend on the U.S. president-elect. For the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, at least the participation of the two parties to the conflict will be necessary. Trump will try to end the war in Ukraine, but this is not a unilateral process. It has to be negotiated, and possibly not only with Russia. It concerns many countries. Well, man, I hope Trump is up to the job. I hope he's been paying attention to what's been happening in Ukraine. Otherwise, he's going to have to call that Emmy Award-winning journalist from Foreign Policy. Or maybe he can just get in touch with the Emmy Award-winning actor asking for all the communists to come together. No more division. We are the unifiers, despite being also the dividers. So come together, protect one another, and get one of those phones that doesn't give you the internet or any social media. Because, man, if you are a Hollywood actor, it's going to be rough out there. Now, as I noted on the live stream yesterday, I am going to have a bit more sporadic a schedule than usual. I try to keep it 5 days a week. That is not going to happen over these next few weeks. I'm going to be on the road a little bit, traveling a little bit, visiting some people that I haven't seen nearly enough over these last 4 years. I will still be putting shows out pretty regularly. I want to spend some more time writing as well. And then, of course, next week we have Gart. So bear with me just a little bit. There's probably going to be some weeks where I only get 2 or 3 episodes up, and I will probably also focus more on live streams when I have the time, rather than sitting down and trying to record one of these longer, more intricate episodes. Now, of course, I also know that there is the potential for things to get a little crazy over these next couple of months. So please understand that if things do get crazy, I will be on here. I will find a way to cover all that. I'll just be a little more sporadic. So if that happens, just try to bear with me a little bit over these next couple of weeks and then around the holidays, and then things will normalize. I will be back soon at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.